The day has finally come. I've gotten my hands on the 2021 Hyundai Santa Fe Hybrid. This is, interestingly enough, the most requested vehicle review over at alexonautos.com. A close second is the Subaru Outback, which is lurking in the background of this image. If you want to know how these two vehicles compare, be sure and check out that video. It's coming a few weeks after the one you're watching today. I think it's easy to see why so many people have been interested in the Santa Fe. It has really good looks. They've redesigned the front end to definitely make it sharper, a little bit more aggressive than before, and the price tag is really hard to beat. This vehicle starts at $27,000 before that pesky destination charge. That is $5,000 to $6,000 less than the average midsize two-row crossover, but only about $2,000 more than the starting price of many compact crossovers. So if you're looking at a RAV4 or a CR-V and you're thinking to yourself, I wish it had a little bit more room, this is going to be an excellent option. When Hyundai decides to refresh a product, the result ends up often being closer to what some car companies would call a mild redesign. We have an entirely new front-end look, a new rear-end look, a definitely redesigned and restyled interior, more premium features, and a new engine lineup under the hood for 2021. The big thing you'll notice is this really dramatic grille. I wasn't sure about this when I first saw it in pictures, but in person I do like it. And this is the first time where I've seen a Hyundai divorced headlight arrangement that I actually care for. These are the headlights down here. This is the accent light, the turn signal. You see it flashing over there, and the two combine to give us this really dramatic T-shape that runs right through there. I think the difference is that these headlights are really well integrated into the grille. You can see it stretches out there rather than having them as some sort of odd module down here like we find in the Hyundai Kona. There's a radar adaptive cruise control sensor right down there at the bottom, and then a camera right below the Hyundai logo. This vehicle is essentially fully loaded. It has the optional front parking sensors, radar adaptive cruise control is standard, and this one has the optional 360-degree camera. At 188.4 inches long, this is almost exactly the same size as the Ford Edge. This is about 2 inches longer than its most direct competitor in hybrid form, the Toyota Venza. It's the only other hybrid in this segment. Due to the size and the price range of the Santa Fe, it starts at $27,000, but will certainly go up to very similar pricing that we find in the Nissan Murano, Subaru Outback, etc. There are a wide variety of competitors that you might want to be cross-shopping this with. This is 7 inches shorter than the Volkswagen Atlas Cross Sport. That's based on the really big Volkswagen Atlas. And the big difference seems to be in the cargo area. There's a little bit more rear seat room and a whole lot more hood up front. So you won't necessarily find that much more room inside the Atlas, even though it is bigger on the outside. The other big difference is the width. It is a little wider on the inside. Now, you might want to also consider this a discount alternative to something like the Lexus RX. There are definitely areas where the RX feels more premium. It has a V6 under the hood, a V6 hybrid system, etc. But this is going to be a lot less expensive, and you might be surprised how close it gets in terms of refinement. Somewhat surprising for a hybrid, we have 235 width tires up front and out back. Generally speaking, the competition has 225 width tires. I'm not the biggest fan of these wheels, however. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. Hyundai's decided that their products need to look like members of the family, but not necessarily like Russian nesting dolls. So you'll notice that the rear-end design and the front-end design aren't exactly the same as the larger Hyundai Palisade or the less expensive Hyundai Tucson. We have a divorced tail lamp arrangement back here, so parking lights up here in LEDs, turn signals down there in that section, backup lights right back up here. Since this is the hybrid model, we have a hybrid badge, and then there are no visible exhaust tips at the bottom. With such a low sticker price, you might think that the base Santa Fe doesn't have as many driver assistance doodads on it as you'd find in a base RAV4 or CR-V. But you'd be wrong. We actually have a few more features than you'll typically find in a compact crossover. Adaptive cruise control is standard, as is lane keeping, lane departure warning, rear parking sensors, which is a feature that I really love, and blind spot warning with rear cross traffic detection is standard. Optional, and on this particular model, we have front park assist, the smart park feature, which allows you to back the vehicle in and out of a parking space with the remote control, the 360-degree camera system, and Hyundai's Highway Drive Assist. That's what they call their more aggressive lane centering system. The engine lineup goes a long way to understanding the lower base price in the Santa Fe. Rather than a standard V6 like we find in the Murano or the Passport, this vehicle gets a 2.5-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine producing 191 horsepower. That's a little bit less power than we find standard in the RAV4. That engine is mated to a standard 8-speed automatic transmission and your choice of front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. There's also a 2.5-liter turbo bumping things up to 281 horsepower and over 300 pound-feet of torque. That engine ditches the 8-speed automatic in favor of an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission. It's essentially the same engine that we find under the hood of the Sonata N-Line. Then there's this hybrid drivetrain, which mates a 1.6-liter turbo producing 177 horsepower with 2 different electric motors. There's an electric starter generator on one side that produces 17 horsepower, and then a 59 horsepower electric motor mated to the 6-speed automatic transmission. Yes, you heard that right, 6-speed automatic. This does not use a dual motor planetary gear set or a serial hybrid system like we find in some Honda hybrids, or a CVT like we find in some hybrids out there. The combination here gives you 226 horsepower and approximately 230 pound-feet of torque, although Hyundai won't give us an exact specification on the torque. This is good for either 32 or 34 miles per gallon combined, depending on the options that you get. If you want a little bit of electric range, there's going to be a plug-in hybrid system available too. That pairs the same basic drivetrain with a bigger electric motor, bumping power up to 260 horsepower, and then they stuff a 13.8 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack under the front seats, so it doesn't occupy any cargo area or any under rear seat area. We don't have any official EPA mileage estimates for that model just yet, but according to Hyundai, that should get you about 30 miles of range. Behind the power hatch, we find 36.4 cubic feet of cargo capacity. This is way above what we find in the Venza. By the numbers, this looks like it's not too far off what we see in some compact crossovers, but I think that's down to the way that cargo area is measured, and of course, we have this enormous divider here. Hyundai does not give us additional specifications for the under load floor cargo area or when the rear seats are moved all the way forward, because remember, they do slide forward and backward. But this divider gives you an idea of how much storage space there is under the load floor. There's this 3-position divider, and then if I just grab the camera here and we go in for a look-see, you'll notice that this cargo area is enormous. Right there behind the rear seats, that rear seat is moved all the way forward in its tracks, and we then have this large underfloor storage area. I can completely remove this floor from the car, and then you have access to this entire storage well under there. You can see the seat tracks for that second row that slides. Right by the cargo area opening, we have another little flap that opens up to give us access to the tire iron, the jack, and then this is where the 12-volt battery is located. You can see that there is a bit of a change versus the regular Santa Fe, because in that model, this area would be a little bit more usable. You can actually see the cut-ins right there for the roller cargo area storage. In the regular Santa Fe, you'd be able to store it right down here in this area. The Santa Fe Hybrid loses just that little bit of practicality there. But we still have a spare tire. It's located right here under the bumper. It is a temporary spare tire located right there next to the exhaust. This underfloor cargo area is absolutely enormous. If it weren't for my childbearing hips, I could probably fit here under the load floor, and then you've got all this space above it. I also have some electric releases to flip and fold those second row seats forward, which is a handy practical touch, and then you just have the ability to expand the cargo area if you want to by scooting those seats all the way forward. That's why this cargo area is definitely going to be getting 10 out of 10 points in my exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. We also have a power hatch. And a little bit more surprising for vehicles like this, we have an emergency kiddie release on the hatch, something that is not legislatively required for hatchbacks in North America, but Hyundai and Kia are two of the few manufacturers that still give us one. In case you're wondering, it's located right under this tiny little hatch release door, and it is not glow in the dark because it's not required to be. Front seat comfort is excellent. Keep in mind that I am driving the top-end version of the hybrid trim, so we do have things like 4-way adjustable lumbar support and an extending thigh cushion with a 2-position memory over there on the driver's door. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column, so the feature set is a little bit different than what you might find in the Toyota or the Lexus Cross, but I find these seats a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more adjustable as well. Now, rather unfortunately, the passenger seat does not have the extending thigh cushion or the 4-way lumbar. Jumping into the back seat, we find 85.8 inches of combined legroom in the regular Santa Fe and a little bit less in the Santa Fe Hybrid because of the way things have been shuffled around. The battery pack lives under the front passenger seat for the hybrid model and under the 2 front seats for the plug-in hybrid model, so it doesn't affect the way the rear seat is designed like we do find in some of the competition. We also don't have much of a driveline hump, which is really a nice feature. If you're debating between this and something like a RAV4 CR-V or Hyundai's own Tucson, the width of the rear bench seat is definitely going to be a reason to get the Santa Fe. This is a wider vehicle, it's also a little bit longer, so we get more headroom, more width on the rear bench. This is the kind of vehicle that could very easily accommodate 2 adults and a child seat, or 3 adults if you needed to, because we don't have that hump right there. And again, enormous amounts of legroom. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks, and you should know that the front seat tracks in Hyundai vehicles tend to be longer than a lot of the competition, and I still have 2 inches of legroom left. This is a very roomy and accommodating passenger area, and even with this seat all the way back, my feet have no problem moving around down there. The rear seats also feature a recline mechanism, and unusually, they slide forward and backward This allows you to enlarge the cargo area back there, and if, for instance, you had a child seat in front, you could lock it into this position and have that child a little bit closer to the action up front. Now, if I go ahead and scoot these all the way forward, you can see the seat recline mechanism here. There's a lever on the side. We have a pretty reasonable amount of recline. The Santa Fe isn't a luxury vehicle, but it does have a number of nice touches back here, including 2-stage heated outboard rear seats and an integrated sunshade in the rear door, but we still find hard plastics just as you'd expect in a mainstream vehicle. Be sure and let me know what you think about the interior design down there in the comment section. I like the combination of materials in here. This ceiling fabric, if you zoom in on it, kind of reminds me of 1970s fabrics for some reason, but I think it actually works in here. It's a little bit more interesting than the average charcoal or black on black on black design. We have a large panoramic moonroof that extends to just over the second row passengers' heads. You can see those integrated sunshades right there. Two-way adjustable headrests, height adjustable shoulder belts, and this model has the upgraded leather upholstery. This is a two-tone brown interior, so on the camera the colors may be a little bit off, but this is sort of a chestnut. We then have a little bit of a charcoal accent insert strip right there, and then dark brown on the outside with some piping that matches the ceiling. So there's a lot of attention to detail here that I really like. And then of course we have that quilting up there on the top of the seat. More soft touch materials on the front doors than on the rear doors. So the upper section of the door is a soft touch material. We have a hard insert right there, some trim that's sort of imitating, I guess, knurled metal right there, and then a soft touch armrest. There's also a large bottle holder down there at the bottom of the door. The general design of this interior is pretty similar to the pre-refresh Santa Fe, but I don't think any of the parts are directly shared. We have a lot of soft touch materials going on, stitched sections of the upper dashboard, stitched section down here in this chocolate color. We have a large storage area right there. A moderately sized bin-style glove compartment. I was barely able to fit a 10-inch tablet computer inside. In the middle of the dash, we have two different infotainment systems depending on the trim level you get. There's an 8-inch system, and then there is this 10.25-inch system that is mounted on the dashboard, sort of like a tablet computer grafted in there. Behind it, you can see that we have a center channel speaker. We have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, and it may use the entire screen if you want to. The software interface for the system is pretty similar to what we've seen in other Hyundai and even Genesis products, with this really cool home screen where we have a moving map display right there on the side, and then stylized weather graphics right there. Two large air vents that definitely look like the previous generation model. Engine start-stop button. You can see that the stitching continues down this center console. There's a storage area below that. And then above, this vehicle appears to have found all the buttons that other manufacturers have excised from their interiors. We have all the climate control buttons here, so if you really love dedicated buttons for things, this is going to be an excellent option. Buttons for the infotainment system above, including some physical knobs for tune and volume. We then have the Hunt and Peck shifter that we've seen in Hyundai vehicles before. There's a rotary drive mode selector, and then a button to lock the center coupling for the all-wheel drive system, hill descent control, parking sensors, and a button to access the 360-degree camera. We then have two cup holders. One of them can be hidden right behind that door. That's also where we find the USB input. Next to this cup holder, we have a Qi wireless charging slot. You can see that there's just about enough room for my iPhone in its case. If you have the base system, we have wireless CarPlay, but the 10.2-inch system does not. We have a softly padded center armrest that opens to reveal a pretty deep storage cubby. The just over 10-inch infotainment system may not be standard, but this large 12-inch instrument cluster is actually standard, which I think is kind of an interesting twist. There are a few different themes that you can choose, but the basic software is pretty much the same as every other Hyundai vehicle out there. It's controlled via these buttons over here on the steering wheel. You can switch from page to page, get turn-by-turn navigation directions, infotainment readouts, and then toggle through some of the options with this selector. We have the controls for the standard adaptive cruise control over here, highway driving assistant, lane keeping system right there, and then over here on this side we have the controls for the infotainment system. On the back, we have paddle shifters. Remember, this does have a stepped automatic, so this is not going to be imitating gears. It's actually going to run you through the 6 gears that the car has. In terms of power output, the hybrid system slots in the middle of the engine lineup for the Santa Fe, and quite logically, so does performance. This model went 0 to 60 in 7.8 seconds. It's going to be a little bit over 8 seconds if you get the base 2.5-liter engine, pretty similar to what we find in some compact crossovers. And it's definitely going to be swifter if you get the 2.5-liter turbo, but unfortunately I don't have any exact numbers for you just yet because I haven't been able to get my hands on that model to do my usual 0 to 60 testing. In terms of comparisons, this slots in just a hair slower than the Toyota Venza. That system gives us pretty similar power, but remember, the Venza is a smaller vehicle. It actually is essentially a luxury RAV4. They didn't really change the dimensions of the vehicle, so whether you want to consider it competition to the Santa Fe or not, I would leave up to you. But I would argue that it's not really a mid-size crossover. Inside, it has the same dimensions as a RAV4. It actually has less rear headroom, less cargo room. It's a little bit tighter feeling on the inside than the RAV4, but on the outside, it has a longer bumper and a longer bumper in the back. So it's sort of mid-sized on the outside, but not on the inside. On the other hand, it is going to give you better fuel economy and slightly better 0 to 60 performance. But in the braking test, this model really excelled. I stopped from 60 miles an hour to 0 in 118 feet. In the Venza, it took 130. That means that even though this is the hybrid model, stopping distance is pretty comparable to most of the mid-size crossovers out there, as is the ride quality and the handling ability. This feels grown-up. It feels more mature, a little bit more isolated than the average compact crossover, a little bit more comfortable for longer highway journeys, but it still feels good out on the road. It doesn't feel sloppy or overly large like you might find in some three-row crossovers. So if you're really on the fence and you want something that's a little bit sportier, but you need a little bit of extra room, not quite sure whether you want to go 3 rows, this is going to be an excellent option for you. If, however, you do like the size of this and you want a 3rd row, there's the Kia Sorento, and the Sorento is very closely related to the Santa Fe. They drive an awful lot like one another out on the road. The big difference when it comes to the hybrid system is that this has all-wheel drive, and for some reason on the Sorento, you can only get front-wheel drive with the hybrid. When it comes to absolute handling scores, I'm going to give this an A-. There are sporty options in the mid-size crossover segment. Something like the Chevy Blazer actually has a really great feel to it out on the road, as does the top-end version of the Ford Edge, but keep in mind those are going to be a lot more expensive than the Santa Fe that I'm driving here. The grown-up character of the Santa Fe continues when you get it out on rougher road surfaces like the one that I'm on here. Keep in mind I am driving the hybrid model, which does have different wheels and tires than you'll find, especially on, I guess what you could say is the sportiest version of the Santa Fe, the 2.5-liter turbo model. But this does an excellent job of soaking up bumps and dips in the road, and it definitely has a more isolated feel than you'll find in a base RAV4 or a base CR-V, or even mid-level trims of those models. Even though the Santa Fe is not necessarily that much heavier than a wide variety of compact crossovers, it certainly feels a little bit bigger out on smaller roads like the one that I'm on here. It doesn't feel massive, however. I think that this is an excellent compromise in terms of size, because this feels an awful lot like the average mid-size sedan. In terms of dimensions, that makes sense, because it really is about the same size as a Camry, an Accord, or a Sonata. Over a week of mixed driving, I've been averaging 33 mpg. This particular trim is rated for 32. If you get the base version of the Santa Fe Hybrid, that one's rated for 34. Perhaps a little bit more important to some people than just the pure fuel economy number is the fact that this is a no compromises hybrid. Performance is better than the base version of the Santa Fe, fuel economy is considerably better, and this feels just like a regular Santa Fe. If I floor it, we get gear shifts. The transmission actually has to shift for us because it's a 6-speed automatic transmission. I have paddle shifters. I can downshift if I want to. I can put this in sport mode. I can put the vehicle into snow mode or lock the center coupling. I can get the same kind of grip that you'd find out of an all-wheel drive Santa Fe, because this has a mechanical all-wheel drive system. That means that in sticky situations, snow, ice, inclement weather, mud, etc., this vehicle is capable of sending a great deal more power to the rear axle than the Venza or the RAV4 or the Toyota Highlander Hybrid, because those all use all-wheel drive systems. There's an electric motor on the back, and that can generally send about 80 horsepower or so depending on the exact vehicle model within the Toyota lineup to the rear axle, and that's not as much as can go to the front axle. And due to the design of those systems, it's just going to feel different if you're in a slippery situation. You're going to get a lot of front wheel spin before the rear wheels engage, and that's not going to be the case in this, because the traction control system will be able to sort of clamp down on the wheels up front, direct power to the rear. This doesn't have locking differentials, keep that in mind, but it is going to be more capable than an all-wheel drive system. Going a little bit out of order, the other thing you'll notice is the cabin quietness. At 71 decibels in here, this is quieter than the average compact crossover. You can thank extra sound insulation, the laminated windows, etc. Even though this has a large panoramic moonroof and the shade is open, it's still quieter than the RAV4 or CR-V. And that's why if I were shopping for a crossover in the US right now, I would certainly take a look at the less expensive mid-size crossovers rather than a compact crossover, unless you really don't have room in your garage. And there's some excellent options out there. We have this Hyundai Santa Fe, we have the Outback, the Blazer, etc. So without further ado, let's dive right into the competition and the pricing. Let's talk about the pricing on both the regular Santa Fe and the Santa Fe Hybrid, because the Hybrid doesn't really have much true competition in this segment. There is, of course, the Toyota Venza, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Hyundai has already announced 2022 pricing for the Santa Fe, and production has already started by the time that I'm shooting this video. So I'm going to be talking about 2022 pricing here primarily. Across the board, it looks like pricing has only gone up by about $200, but it depends on exactly which options you select and exactly which trim level you're looking at. They've also juggled around some of the options on the vehicle. So when you actually look at the pricing a bit more closely, it actually is going to be a little bit less expensive in some ways than the previous model year vehicle because more features become standard. The big change is that blind spot monitoring and rear cross-traffic detection is standard on all trims of the Santa Fe for 2022, and technically it was optional for the base SE trim, although it doesn't look like I could find any of those base SE models without it. So for 2022, it's going to start at $27,200, very well equipped. The SEL model, which I think is what most people are going to start with, is $29,000, so still definitely within the pricing range of the average compact crossover out there. This is the model where if you add the premium package, you can get leather, the premium audio system, panoramic moonroof, the 10.25-inch infotainment system as well. With that out of the way, let's dive into the first competitor, which has to be the Toyota Venza. Toyota is calling this a mid-size vehicle, even though it really is just a luxury RAV4. So let's slice and dice this a bit. It starts at $32,670 and has the same 219 horsepower hybrid system as the RAV4 Hybrid. It also has the RAV4 Hybrid's all-wheel drive system standard. So all-wheel drive is standard, but it's not a mechanical all-wheel drive system, so it is going to be a little bit less capable, and it's going to feel a bit differently on ice or on snow or other slippery surfaces. To create the Venza, essentially what Toyota did was they took a RAV4 and they gave it an entirely new interior, changed the roof line of the vehicle and the front and rear bumpers. But most importantly, they did not move the wheels around, they did not move the seat frames around, and they didn't really change the floor pan of the vehicle at all. And that's why you'll notice that even though it is pretty close to the Santa Fe in size, it's only about 2 inches shorter, it has over 7 inches less legroom and 20% less cargo capacity. It also is narrower on the inside because, again, it is not truly a mid-size crossover. On the other hand, if you're shopping for a compact crossover and you want something with a more premium feeling interior and a little bit more exterior style, then the Venza is exactly the right vehicle for you. The big thing you'll notice is that we have nearly 3 inches less rear headroom, and that was a problem for me in the Venza. Also keep in mind that the rear seats in the Santa Fe move forward and backward, and the 20% more cargo area is calculated with those seats all the way back. So if you remove the rear cargo divider, you push those seats 6 inches forward, you would still have more room than you'd find in the Venza, and you'd have about 50% more cargo capacity in the back. Next up, we have the Sorento Hybrid, which is, interestingly enough, very closely related to the Santa Fe. This is exactly the same hybrid system, minus the all-wheel drive system, and there hasn't really been a big explanation as to why that happens over there on the Kia other than fuel economy. The Kia will give you 39 miles per gallon combined versus 32 or 34, and the big difference is that all-wheel drive system. So if you want all-wheel drive, you want to cross that one off your list. Obviously, the styling is nothing alike on these two vehicles, inside or outside. Kia is certainly going for a more aggressive, edgy look, and Hyundai is going after something that's a bit more luxurious, a bit more refined. The Sorento is also a 3-row vehicle, so if you're looking for something that has 3 rows, that's going to be the best option for you, but you should know that it only has one more seat than we find in the Santa Fe. The Santa Fe has a 3-person bench in the back, and the Sorento, for some reason, only has captain's chairs in the hybrid, so we just have 2 seats in the middle and then 2 seats in the way back, giving us 6 seats. And of course, if you do put 5 people in your Sorento, you'll actually have less cargo space available than in the Santa Fe, because you have to put 2 people in the middle, 1 person in the back, and then you're going to have maybe about 25 to 28 cubic feet of cargo capacity. Moving along, I'm going to skip right over the Jeep Grand Cherokee because we're going to be getting a new model soon, and of course the Grand Cherokee really isn't the most direct competitor to the Santa Fe. I'm also going to be skipping the Subaru Outback because if you want to know about that, there's going to be a separate video where I take a deep dive into my 2 favorite mid-size crossovers. So with that out of the way, let's move right on to the Chevy Blazer. For 2022, the Blazer has become a lot more expensive than for 2021, and the big reason is that they decided to delete the base engine. Previously, Chevy was playing the same game as Hyundai was, giving us a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine in the Blazer and pricing it very much like a compact crossover. So you could choose to get something a little bit bigger, a little bit roomier for the same price. That's a little different now. They've decided to just cross that model off the shopping list and make the vehicle start at $33,400. That's a pretty massive bump. The 2-liter turbo becomes standard. The 9-speed automatic transmission on that model is standard as well. The Blazer is a solid alternative if you like the style. I think that styling is really a subjective thing, and personally, I prefer the style of the Santa Fe a little bit more than the Blazer, but I do like the way the Blazer looks. I think they did a good job styling it inside and out. As far as premium feel goes, I think the Santa Fe has better interior materials and better fit and finish than the Blazer, however, but the Blazer is probably going to have a bigger discount on the hood. The Blazer's pretty roomy, but not quite as roomy as the Santa Fe. The styling choices involved with the Blazer definitely limited cargo capacity and rear seat legroom as well. Bottom line with the Blazer, it's a solid alternative. If you're looking for a V6 and a traditional automatic transmission, that is definitely an excellent choice. I would personally pick the Santa Fe, but you absolutely can't go wrong with the Blazer. You also absolutely can't go wrong with our next competitor here, which is the Toyota RAV4. It's the best-selling compact crossover in the US and the best-selling hybrid in the US by a wide and ever-increasing margin. Nearly 30% of RAV4s leave the dealer lot in hybrid configuration, and there is a plug-in hybrid if you can get your hands on one. Now, the non-hybrid starts at $26,840 for the base model with blind spot monitoring. That's about the closest you can get to a base Santa Fe configuration. However, you will find a few more standard features in the Santa Fe than in the RAV4, so oddly enough, these two vehicles end up very, very closely priced. What's surprising about that is that the Santa Fe is really not a RAV4 competitor at all. Theoretically, that's the Tucson's job, and the Tucson comes in regular and hybrid format. It's also going to have a plug-in hybrid at some point here soon. It's more RAV4 sized, especially in width, but the Santa Fe has always been a discount option or an inexpensive value option, however you want to take a look at it, and that's still continuing for 2022, even with the new, larger Tucson on the floor. Again, the hybrid system is a little bit different because this uses the same hybrid system that we find in the Venza. The RAV4 hybrid starts at $28,800, but in theory, the XLE premium trim is probably the better corollary to the Santa Fe, and you guessed it, that ends up being shockingly close in price, about $32,800 for that vehicle. Because of the way options are packaged on the Hyundai and the Toyota, it's difficult to get them truly comparably equipped, but more or less you'll end up right in the same neighborhood. Choosing between these two vehicles can definitely be tough. I like the look of the RAV4. I also like the look of the Santa Fe. I think the interior is a bit more premium in the Santa Fe, something that you'd expect out of the next category up. But this really is a debate between efficiency and space. You'll find a lot more room on the inside of the Santa Fe, but you'll find decently higher efficiency in the RAV4, whether we're talking about the regular RAV4 or the RAV4 hybrid. You'll likely also find, again, longer-term reliability to be higher in the RAV4, but it's probably not a huge deal based on the reliability metrics we've seen out of this exact drivetrain in the Hyundai Sonata and other Hyundai products in the past. This hybrid system may be new for Hyundai, but it's really a combination of their existing hybrid system components and existing engine components, just reimagined in a slightly different way. The 1.6-liter turbo has been pretty reliable. This is just the latest version of it. This 6-speed automatic transmission has been around for quite some time. It's simply the latest version of it as well. And again, keep in mind that you do get a longer standard warranty on the Hyundai, so most people in that 10-year, 100,000-mile window are not going to see too much difference other than the fuel economy improvements that you'll find in the RAV4. It really will get you 40 mpg. Now it's time to bottom line the Santa Fe. This is absolutely an excellent buy for a compact crossover shopper in the US that's looking for a little bit more room, or a mid-size crossover shopper that wants a better value than you'll find in a Jeep Grand Cherokee or a Ford Edge or, honestly, a Nissan Murano as well. The Santa Fe is really, really well priced and really well positioned. I'm actually, to be perfectly honest, surprised that Hyundai has not raised the price of the Santa Fe a bit more because we now have the Hyundai Tucson that's grown in size. The Tucson is a pretty large and accommodating compact crossover, and in a logical world, that could have meant that the Santa Fe could have become a bit more expensive, a little bit more exclusive in that way. But instead, Hyundai decided to improve the Santa Fe's interior design, interior parts quality, give us the hybrid system, the plug-in hybrid system, the calligraphy model, etc., and still retain that value proposition that they've long been known for. If I were shopping for a mid-size crossover and I didn't need the towing ability that you'd find in something like the Jeep Grand Cherokee or the off-road ability that you'd find in that Grand Cherokee, I would certainly put the Santa Fe on my shopping list, and it would be right at the top of the list as well. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section, and be sure and stay tuned because I will have a video comparing my two favorites, the Subaru Outback and the Hyundai Santa Fe, coming up very, very soon. These two vehicles are very close in terms of their value proposition and strangely close in terms of their comfort level, capability level, etc. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section as well. Find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all those other things, social places, the merch site at AOAmerch.com. I'm tripping over my tongue here, and I will see all of you later.